Hi there, I am Misty Purcell from Luminous Fiber Arts, and I'm here to talk to you today about pillow finishing. So if you've ever struggled to finish your cross-stitched pillows in a way that you're happy with, or you've been too afraid to even attempt it, I'm here to give you all my best tips and tricks to make the process easier and less intimidating. I'm just going to walk you through how I finish a pillow. We're going to be finishing this set of pillows, Santa and Rudy, and the design is called Delivering Holiday Cheer. You can find it at luminousfiberarts.com. But I'm going to walk you through how to make a pillow. It doesn't matter what pattern you use. I'm just going to give you the steps to help you have a successful finish and make the process easier, hopefully. So I just want to take a couple minutes to talk about some things. First, I want to give some acknowledgement. I learned to do pillow finishing and tips from different people, so I want to acknowledge those people. One huge contributor to my pillow finishing has been Pfeiffer, the Twisted Stitcher. So if you have not checked out her YouTube tutorials, or even if you have, check them out again. She's got so many great ones. I learned how to do pillow finishing from her, and many ornament finishes I've learned. Helen D., also known as East Coast Crafter, I've learned a lot from her as well, especially the tip about putting yarn in the corners of your pillow. I'll be talking about that, and that was something I learned from her. And then another person that I learned from is a shop on Etsy called Michelle Patterns, and I've done some of her purse sewing patterns and learned a technique that I'm going to show for finishing the back for basting stitches, and so I'll be talking about that in the video. So anyway, I didn't learn in a vacuum. I didn't teach myself everything. I've developed some things along the way that are my own, and I've learned from other people, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them. And I will also link to them in the description below the video. So the video description will also have a list of supplies so that you can see them, but I'll also flash on the screen before each part some of the supplies that you'll need to complete that section of your pillow finishing. But if you want the full list, it's in the video description just to make it easier for you to find what you need in advance. So I hope that you'll enjoy the video, and I hope that you'll find it very helpful and you'll really enjoy your finishes and feel more confident in your finishes. So today we are going to turn these cuties into pillows. So these instructions will work whatever pillow you're making. I'll be giving specific information for these particular pillows and the fabric count that I'm using, but I'll also explain the process so that you can do any pillow, whatever count you use, whatever size the pillow is. So the first step will be to press each of your stitched pieces, or however many stitched pieces you're finishing. You want to press them face down on a padded ironing board. I put a wool pressing mat on mine with a towel over it. You don't have to go to that far of an extent, but maybe taking a bath towel and folding it a couple of times, putting it on your ironing board, and then putting your stitching down face down and pressing it and using some steam to help flatten your piece. And then once you've finished pressing, which I've already pressed obviously, then you can go ahead and trim around your stitched piece. So you have some options. Oftentimes I'll use a 3/4 inch margin. So I would measure from the farthest point 3/4 of an inch on each side and trim around it. Sometimes pillows benefit from having a narrower margin, and so it depends on what you like and what your trim is and just what you're doing in general. So sometimes with rickrack you might want more because it'll show on the front, but something like a ribbon, which is really only on the side, you don't necessarily need this much. I've gone, 3/4, I've gone a little bit less, even down to 1/2 inch sometimes, and that has looked really good, but it does depend on the project and what you like. Now if you're going to add, let's say you wanted to add fabric to the front, like let's say you wanted to make a pillow that looked like that, then I would make this margin a little bit narrower than whatever the rest of your margins are, because some of this will kind of go towards the back and you won't be able to see it as it like gets rounded from being stuffed, but this part here will not. And so this will end up looking bigger than all of the rest of your pillow by a little bit. So I would take off like an extra extra eighth of an inch here, maybe even an extra quarter of an inch. So if you wanted to put a piece of fabric on the front, whatever side, I'd take off an eighth to a quarter of an inch on just that one side compared to the rest of the sides, make it a little bit narrower. I'm not going to do that. I'm just explaining what you would do. I did use then 3/4 of an inch as my margin, and I trimmed all the way around. So my pillow finishes at a little bit of a weird size, or the current size is a little bit weird. It's 5 inches wide by 5 7/8 inches high, and I mark that down on a piece of paper to help me do the math for the backing piece. But what you're going to do then is, once you measure the size of your stitched pieces or piece, then you're going to want to cut out some other pieces as well. So here are the front pieces, and then I'm going to use, I don't always use this. This is something Vonna recommends, and it depends on the project as to whether I feel it needs it or not. But sometimes I'll include a piece of white cotton fabric behind the stitched piece, and so I would cut that out to the exact same size. It will go, you'll fuse this. So you'll want to have a piece of fusible that will get fused to the back of the stitching, and then the white cotton will go as an additional layer, but you can see how it brightens things up already. So it's helpful, but not a requirement. So if you're going to do what I'm doing, then you're going to cut out like I said, my piece is 5 inches wide by 5 7/8 high. So then I'm going to cut out a piece of white cotton fabric. You could use Kona, you could use a white muslin. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And then I'm going to need a piece that's also the same size of my fusible. The fusible is Pellon. It's P44F. That's one that Vonna recommends, and I have enjoyed it too. It gives it a little bit of body, but it's not too stiff. So you'll need to cut those pieces to the exact same size as your front piece. And then we're going to do a little bit of math to figure out the back piece, so don't freak out. Okay, we're not doing trigonometry. This is not calculus. It's not brain surgery. So I'm just going to explain to you how I figure out the math. So as I said, I write down my front piece information. So it's 5 inches wide by 5 7/8 high. I like to draw myself a little graphic. So here's the front of Santa. Here's the front of Rudy. The backing is going to be the same, but I just drew them so that you could see. Okay, so to do the backing, it's generally good, because your fabric will shift, to make the backing a little bit larger than the front. I usually go up about 1/4 of an inch. So you can see here, if it's 5 7/8, I'm just going to pretend that's 6. And so I'm going to say, okay, the height needs to be 6 plus 1/4 of an inch, so 6.25. And so ideally for the width, I would do 5.25, but that's not going to, I'm going to have a seam going up the back of my pillow. So one of the things that makes my pillows, I think, look really nice is that I have a seam going up the center of the back. And so it makes it easier for me to stuff them, and it's easier for me to sew them closed. So basically I want 2 pieces for the backing that are a little bit wider than the front. So the front is 5. So if I were in a perfect world, it would just be 5.25, but that's not going to work mathematically. So we'll go up to 5.5, and we need to account for a seam allowance. So you're going to do 2 pieces, and you need to realize that you're going to lose 1/4 inch from each piece in your seam allowance. So if you have a 3-inch piece and you take 0.25 away, you get 2.75. Okay, so 2.75 plus 2.75 will give you 5.5, which is bigger than the front. It's a lot bigger than the front, but that's okay, because we can just trim it off. So if you feel nervous about this math, 1, don't sweat it, but 2, just make sure the piece is plenty bigger than the front, and you can just center the seam when you're sewing it together, and it will all be fine. So do not stress about this. Again, this is not a big deal. You're just wanting to make sure that you're accounting for the fact that you're going to lose 1/4 inch from each piece of your backing fabric. So here I've cut out my backing fabric pieces. So they're each 3 inches wide by 6.25 inches tall. And then when I sew them together, it'll be like that. So, okay. So you need to cut out your backing fabric pieces to whatever dimension. You're going to need 2 of them per pillow. And I ended up doing 4 because I'm doing 2 pillows. So one will be oriented this way when I put the whole thing together, and the other one will go like this. I generally recommend, so if you're doing a different pillow than this one, and whatever side is the longer side is the side that I think should have the seam running parallel to it. So this is the longer side, the 6 or the 5 7/8 side. So I want my seam to match that. I want it to be parallel to the longest side. And that's because it's easier to stuff your pillow that way. If you go this way, it's a little harder, I think, to reach into some of the corners. So going, especially if you have a very long pillow, this one doesn't really matter so much because it's honestly not that far off from a square. But if you had like a long skinny pillow, you would want to have the length to be able to stuff it easily. Okay, so then, as I said, you need to cut your backing pieces to the size that you determine, and then you're also going to cut some P44F to match the size of your backing pieces. So you're going to need 2 pieces as well for that. Okay, so once you have all your pieces cut, you're going to trim your stitched piece. You're going to potentially cut a white piece of cotton that's the same size as your stitched piece. You're going to cut a piece of P44F, the same size as your stitched piece. You're going to cut your 2 backing pieces, and then 2 pieces of P44F to match the size of your backing pieces. So now we're going to pause, and then we're going to talk about how to fuse the P44F to the back of your stitching and the back of your fabric. If you get nothing else out of this video, the most important thing possibly is what I'm going to tell you right now. When you go to fuse your fusible interfacing to your stitching, you want to fuse it to the back side, the not good side of your stitching. Here's the good side. Put that face down. You do not want to see it while you're fusing something to the back of it. You will be extremely sad if you accidentally fuse over your good side of your stitching because it's almost impossible to fix it. So stop before you do anything. Is your stitching face down? Make sure it is face down. Now, take your fusible, and you can tell which side is the sticky side because if you feel it, there's a side that's bumpy, which is this side. You can just feel it by touching. And then there's a side that just kind of feels like fabric. So you want the bumpy side with the glue to touch the back side of your stitching. And you just place it over. It might not be perfectly aligned, but you want it to be as close as you can get. And then turn your iron down. I usually use either polyester or wool for my setting. And then I'm going to use a pressing cloth. So I have just like an old family hanky. And I just spray it with a water bottle. So I just mist it. And then I lay it over the stitching. I'm using the Shark Professional. This was one that I saw recommended in a video many moons ago. Okay, and you're just going to follow the manufacturer's instructions, which will tell you to press, put your iron down, leave it there. I don't remember for how long. I can't remember numbers very well. But I just keep moving it around. And then you may need to add some steam to help secure it. So I usually do actually, but I'll give it a round first of just using the dampness it's already in. Okay, now we're going to check it and see how it did. Like, is it not fused anywhere? Looks pretty good. Looks like maybe I need to get it there. This is not like super important, but you just want to make sure it's actually sticking and adhered to your stitched piece. so that it's able to do its job, which is to give it some firmness, a little bit of body and stiffness. It's not going to stretch out all over the place. Okay. And so yeah, it can stick because the glue is facing your towel. It can stick to your towel a little bit, but that's okay. And then any interfacing that you see sticking out, you can just trim off. Repeat this process for your backing pieces. Backing fabric should be face down. You want to see the wrong side of your fabric. Feel for the glue side of your fusible, put that facing the back side. You want the fabric side to be up. I usually do 2 pieces at a time. It gets tricky if you try to do more. They tend to shift on you, I think. If you start to get water like I just did, you want to stop. That's not going to help things. So try to dry it out. There's a bit of water there. So stop using the steam, try to get it dried out. Then you can start using the steam again if you need to. So you can just kind of feel like if it feels like it's coming up anywhere, which it might at the corners, then you need to redo. It seems like it's a little loose there, but otherwise it's pretty good. Again, this is not like super crucial, but you do want it sticking properly. So I do have a bit of interfacing sticking out. I'm just going to show you how I trim that really quickly. I think it's really only noticeable mainly on the one side, but I would just use my ruler and my rotary cutter since I have one. And then I can trim off the excess, except I apparently didn't do a very good job. I didn't get that spot at all. Okay, let's try again. So there's a little bit across the top. I'm not really worried about that, but you could trim it. Rudy needs more help. So these have beads, so this is going to slip, so you have to be careful if you are doing something that has beads on it. You do not have to use a ruler and rotary cutter. You can use whatever tools you like. You can just use your own ruler, draw with a pencil, and cut with your scissors. Use what you have, and if you get really into finishing or quilting, then it's worth the investment, but it's not worth it if you don't know if you're going to do much of it or you know you won't do much of it. Okay, so they look good. Next step is to sew if you're using the white cotton. If you're not using the white cotton, you can skip to the next step, but otherwise we're going to sew piece of white cotton to this, and I'm going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I find it a little bit helpful to keep the fabric in place, so by just like giving it a little press with the iron. So I'm actually going to do that first, and then I'm going to sew. And so I'll see you at the sewing machine. So now I'm going to sew the white cotton fabric to the back of my stitching. So you can see the front is here, back is here. I'm going to increase the stitch length. I'm basically basting this down. So it's like a basting stitch, because that'll make it faster. And if I need to take it out for any reason, or like it just doesn't need to be that secure, I just need it there because it's going to get sewn over again. So I'm going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on this. I like it a little bit inside of the actual seam allowance of the pillow. And so it's a little bit difficult to gauge exactly what that is. I usually, on my Juki, just kind of split the toe of the presser foot and that seems to work pretty well. And then I use the edge of the presser foot, which is going to be more of like a scant 1/4 inch, but I use that usually as my guide. And so I'm just going to sew. I've increased the stitch length. It doesn't really matter what you use, honestly, so just use whatever you want. And I'm up to like almost 4 on my machine. And you don't have to stop and cut it. I just, I went too far before I could go backwards, so we'll just go with it. You don't have to cut the thread the way I'm doing it. I'm just being fast. You can use scissors. I will once I get to the actual pillow sewing. So you can see it's bubbling up a little bit here because the fabric has shifted. It's okay. Yeah, you can see there's a little bit of a bump. Doesn't matter. Not going to affect anything. So here, my fabric's actually extending beyond the front. Might actually flip it just so I can see better. Okay, all done. I'm going to trim this excess off, trim any excess off the front that I see sticking out, just because it will make it easier to sew the back on, trim any extra threads that are sticking out, and then I'm gonna start sewing up the backing pieces. Okay, time to stitch up the backing pieces. We are sewing along the long edge of the seam, 1/4 inch seam allowance. You need to reset your stitch length if you changed it. Mine is around a little over 2 normally. In a perfect world, maybe we'll say perfect world, you would use a sewing thread to match your fabric, but I feel like threading this machine is kind of a pain, and I'm just not going to change it. So I don't really think it matters, but for sewing up when you're going to do like a partial seam, and you're going to leave part of it unsewn actually. So when you actually go to hand sew, you do want to match your fabric then, but you can get away with not matching it now. Or you can match it if you want to take the time to unthread your sewing machine and rethread it. I just do not. So I'm going to just move along. Young me would have done that, but old me does not do that. Okay, so you're going to want to, and you may want to mark this with some pins, you're going to mark basically the opening that you're going to turn your stitching through. And so you're going to have a normal stitch length for part of this sewing seam, and then you're going to use a basting stitch. You're going to change your stitch length again for part of it. So you can decide how much of a gap you want. I used to be really stingy with the gap because I didn't want to have to hand sew that much, but I found that it just makes it easier to stuff and to turn, and it's really not that hard to hand sew a few more stitches. So I go with a bigger opening than I used to. So this is like, you know, maybe 1.25 inches on each end, 1.5 inches. Let me just tell you what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Okay, so we're going to start off by normal stitch length. We're going to go forward and backward. So go forward and backward to back stitch and reverse to lock in your stitches. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay. Keep going up to the first pin. Okay, now you're going to stop and you're going to back stitch to secure this in place. Go back to where you started. Now lengthen your stitch length until you get to the next pin. So my stitch length is much longer. Do one more. Okay, go back to your normal stitch length. Stitch a little ways forward. 3 or 4 stitches. Now reverse. And then you can just sew to the end and backstitch again. Okay. And trim. I'm going to do the other one and then I will explain what we're doing next. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take this over to the ironing board and we're going to press it. So the point of doing that basting stitch is to give us a fold for our seam allowance when we go to hand stitch this later. Otherwise we have to figure it out ourselves, but if we do this now, we don't have to think so hard. So what you want to do is open it up and you want to press your seam open all the way. I usually start by kind of hand pressing it and then flip it over and press from the front. Might need to give it a little bit of a press from the back too, just to get it going. This little end here doesn't want to cooperate. Flip it over, give it a press, and then what we can do is take out those long stitches with a seam ripper. So you can see where I back stitch, so I want to go to the other side of that where the longer stitches are, where the basting stitches are. Just pick every few stitches on one side. So the last one, and then you can flip it over and just pull up. And cut. And now when you need to turn your piece right side out after you sew it all together, you have a hole to turn it, but the hole has a marked seam allowance for you that will be easier to find. All right, I'm going to do that to the other one and then we'll go back to the sewing machine. All right, so now we're going to sew one of our pieces. So you're going to put them right sides together, and I would put the front piece on top. So put your backing piece right sides up, put your front piece on top, and you can just kind of center it, knowing that it's going to shift. One way that you can reduce shifting of your fabric as you sew is to start in the middle of a side. I don't know that it's honestly worth it when the sides are so short. You will get some shifting, but I don't know if it's worth doing that. But definitely for like a piece with a very long side, I would start in the middle and sew one way, turn it, start in the middle and sew the other way. So that's just a tip for a way to keep things a little easier for you. And then I'm just trying to kind of center. You can see where my seam allowance is on the back. Trying to center. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, it doesn't matter. I think I'll put a few pins in. You don't have to. I usually like to put a few in. And you can also press this first, which can kind of help keep the layers together. Not sure how much help the pinning will really be in a way, but it does like to stretch out, but I do tend to pin things a little bit. So I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and a tip I learned from Vanna that I've found very useful over the years is to sew all the way to the end and back stitch in the corners. So you'll see me doing that as well, and that was something I learned from Vanna that has been very helpful. Okay, and then one thing you want to be watching for is that when you get to here, you want to make sure that your seam on the back is flat. It makes your life easier. So we'll just do that now. And you can feel it if it moves. Okay, so I'm going to start with back stitching, 1/4 inch seam allowance, forward and backward. I've got my normal stitch length. So I can put my fingers right where the seam is and I can feel that it's flat, but you could also just kind of lift it up and check, is it flat? And where mine tends to catch is right on this lip here. So it's good to just keep an eye, but you can feel it with your fingers. And now that I've taken the pin out, I'm kind of stretching this out so that hopefully it doesn't bunch up. And then I want to back stitch again, several stitches. You can see that it's not perfect. I've even gone a bit askew. It won't matter. Do not worry about it. I tend to like to sew the same direction, so this is going to seem probably weird to you, but I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So because I started here and sewed down, I'm going to do the same thing. So that it's not shifting a lot. You do not need to do this the way that I did, but since the foot is pretty much the same size, whichever side I use, I just turn and use the other side and it doesn't bother me. Oops. All right, let's do the longer sides. Back stitching at the start and end again. You want to make sure that your back stitching is intersecting. You're going all the way back to the beginning. So you can see how my back stitching has intersected here. So I've got a good strong point because I'm going to do some trimming later on. Okay, one more seam to sew. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before, but you don't have to do that. You can turn it around, but I'm just going to keep them going the same direction because it seems like it works a little better for me. If your foot isn't the same size on both sides, that won't really work for you. It just works because this foot is made this way. Okay, so now what I need to do is go back to the cutting mat and trim the excess fabric and trim the corners. So that's going to be the next step. So here's what the back looks like. And trim everything excess off and trim this flush with the white. All right, we made it. We're done with the sewing machine. Now we're going to trim. So first, I just use the rotary cutter, or you can use your scissors, and we're just going to get all the corners correct to start with. Or, excuse me, all the sides even. So I'm lining up my ruler with the edge of the stitched piece, and I'm just going to trim off the excess, or if you use scissors, you would do the same thing. You'd run your scissors along the fabric edge and trim off the excess backing fabric. Having a little trouble cutting because the beads are pushing up part of the ruler, so I don't get quite as good of a contact there. Okay, so now what we want to do is trim these corners a bit so that they don't poke out. Like when you turn your pillow right side out, it's difficult to get the corners to be pointy if you leave everything just as you have it now. So if we trim the corners, it will make it nicer. You can use whatever scissors you want. I tend to like these Karen K. Buckley Perfect Scissors for this. I don't know, something about the size of them and the blades. So what you want to make sure that you're doing, and Vanna will tell you this too, so you can see where there's an intersection of your back stitching. Don't cross over that or you're going to have a hole. So you want to trim, and I actually find for me that it works a little better if I kind of curve it. So I tend to kind of go around, kind of like a half moon shape. So I'm careful to be aware of that. I need to be on the outer edge of that. And I just kind of curve my corners now. This is something that I started doing, I don't know exactly when, a little while ago. It just seemed like it worked better for me. Okay, now we are going to turn our piece right side out and push out the corners. Okay, so turn your piece over. You've got your opening here. And it's easier to grab a corner and just kind of pull through. So I'm grabbing a corner here and pulling through the center. But it goes pretty easy if you leave a big enough opening. So it looks like here you can see, even though I back stitched, I must have like gotten a little bit of my seam when I was clipping things or something. So this is coming undone, which is when you wouldn't really want to use a light colored sewing thread. You'd want to match your fabric, because now this shows a little bit, but whatever. I'm not gonna worry about it. So I'm gonna get to the corners. Now I'm going to use a chopstick to push out the corners. You can use either end. You see this is an old chopstick. It's a wooden one. You want to be careful you don't like overdo it, because you could conceivably break your seam open, but you can push firmly. And you can see I've got a nice little pointy corner there. See, that's looking nice. So I kind of move my chopstick along up the inside like this and push it, and then sometimes I need to also go this way and push it. So that's the action that I'm doing from inside that you can't exactly see. So I'm going like this, and I'm trying to grab if there's like excess fabric in the point to push that out. And I can also go from the bottom up like this too. So then you can kind of see from the front how your corners are looking. That's pretty good. And so that is turning it right side out and pressing out the corners. Now we can start stuffing. Oh, it's looking so cute already. Aw. I haven't finished this before, obviously. Like, this is me finishing a model, so it's the first time I'm seeing it getting close to being done. So it's fun for me to see what it's looking like. Okay, I'm gonna repeat for the other one. Pretty good. I think I could do a little bit more with this corner maybe. So yeah, doing that little curved bit that I was talking about, that half moon trim, just takes the bulk out of these corners. It really helps a lot. Okay, so let's talk about stuffing. Okay, so we're gonna stuff Rudy, and I'm gonna use two things. I'm gonna use some yarn for the corners, which is what Helen D does, and I find it very useful. And then we're also going to use some, Mountain Mist, Fiber Loft, so it's just a polyfill. Vonna recommends that, and I've been happy with it. And, you know, I find that Vonna doesn't need yarn for her corners, but I do. I'm not Vonna, so I don't have that magic skill of not needing to stuff my corners of my pillow. And what happens when you stuff this and then iron it with some steam is that it's going to shrink up, which is great. It gives you a nice flat pillow, but no matter how much I stuff it, I can't seem to get the stuffing to stay in the corners. So this is like the stopgap measure to help my corners look nice. So you can use probably whatever yarn you want. I'm a knitter and I just have a lot of yarn around. I tend to like wool or alpaca, but I imagine other yarns would work. So just try stuff and see. So I'm just going to cut off, I'm going to need 4 lengths, and you don't need a ton of yarn, but usually what I do is like I wrap it around my finger and then I go like a different direction. I'm just trying to make kind of a, like a little corner shaped piece. It doesn't have to be amazing. It's just gonna, you know, like ideally it would be a cone. It doesn't look like a cone. Let me try one more time, but I can't promise that I'm gonna get it to look cone-like. But that would be, you know, the shape of your corner would be kind of, the inside would be kind of a cone. All right, that's looking better. That's looking more like a cone. All right, so you can turn it over and stick it into a corner. And I usually kind of stuff from one side to the other and then add the other corner piece as I need. So I'm not going to worry about putting the next corner piece in. So you would pull apart some polyfill and you want to fluff it. It's going to get unfluffed later on, but you want it to be fluffy to start with. And when you buy a bag, it actually is relatively fluffed. But if you buy the like really big bags, I don't know if they're like, how big are they? The 3-pounder. If you buy the 3-pounder, it's pretty squished in there. So you're going to need to fluff it up more if you buy a really big quantity, which I haven't in the past, but like last time I needed to buy some, that was the only size available. So that is what I bought. And then you're just going to stuff it in. And try to get your pillow to a firm, relatively firm thickness. I don't find that stuffing hooks, I've tried those or stuffing forks, you might have heard of them. I don't find that they're that useful for this, so I don't bother with them. If I need to adjust things, I can just use the chopstick to push things around. Most of the time I can get things pretty well with my fingers, but once in a while, a chopstick is helpful. So you can work across, you can work down. Eventually you're going to do both, or you know, you're going to work all the different directions, so it doesn't really matter. So the reason I like this method of sewing a seam along the back is that when I used to sew the way that other people did, which is that you just use one piece of fabric for the whole back, and then you'd leave a turning spot like here, and then you'd hand sew it closed. This would just kind of look not good. And I mean, I would be really careful, but for me, it would kind of like pull in a little bit and just not look as nice. And that's not true necessarily of other people and their work, but for me, that's just how it ended up looking. And I got frustrated and I was like, well, there must be a better way. And then I thought about this, which I had learned from a sewing pattern, from Michelle Patterns, to do this method of sewing your seam all the way, but with a basting stitch for part of the way. And that way you have a seam allowance to sew with by hand. And anyway, I found that worked really well when I learned it. And I thought, well, maybe I could apply it to this and get a better result. And for me, it really worked wonders. So that's why I advocate this. It is a bit more work in terms of the math and the sewing, but for me, it's well worth it in the result that I get. And so you just have to try what works for you. If you'd rather do one piece as a backing fabric, then just do that. And you might get different results and be very happy with them. So this is just an option. This is not the only way to finish a pillow. This is just the way I finish pillows. And I get a lot of compliments about my pillows, and I've gotten a lot of requests for a tutorial. And so I wanted to share what I've figured out works for me with you in case it would help you with your finishing. So I'm getting kind of close to this other end here. I'm going to go ahead and cut some yarn to put in this corner. I'm not really worried about it being the exact same length. So basically how I'm wrapping this to get my conical shape is I go like 2 or 3, 4 rounds around my finger, pull it off, and then wrap it so it's going this way, and then I turn it and wrap around it like this and try to kind of build it up so that it gets wider at the bottom. So how do you know when there's enough? I don't have a good answer for that actually, except that you want it to feel very firm, and this is getting there, but it's not there yet. You can see honestly just by looking at the front, like it's not that full, so I should keep going. And then I'll fill in this side, and then I'll have to keep stuffing. So you'll think you're done and you're not. It's the best I can say. Keep going. Don't have it crazy full, but you want it pretty full. So I've been filling in the sides. I'm going to start filling in the center and work up here as well. So it's starting to get there. But it definitely still needs some stuffing. You can kind of tell by how firm it is. I think it could use a little bit more, but it's getting there. Yeah, I mean, just in general, it could use a little bit more. So if you see like a big dip, then you might want to add some more stuffing to try to push this up a little bit. And then that will also improve a little bit after you press it once you've sewn everything together. But by nature, pillows will dip a bit, just a little bit between the corners and the top and bottom and sides, etc. So like right now what I can feel is like my fingers can go down to the bottom of this. Like there's enough gaps in here still, so I need to keep stuffing. So I can see that these are starting to look pretty good, but I can feel all my way down into there. So there's not enough stuffing there. Okay, we're getting close here. So you can see it's looking pretty good. Looks like I need a little more on this side still. And I'm just trying to feel it, like how full is it? Is that consistent across the pillow? Still feels like it's a little bit loose in the middle. So you want it to be pretty firm and you want it to be well stuffed. You don't want to overstuff it. So one example of overstuffing is if you can't get this closed like at all, if it's like really sticking out, then that's not going to work because you got to be able to sew it up. So I'm getting pretty close. And you also want to look at it. I've got it a little, see, it's kind of a little lumpy over here, what I just did. Just kind of make sure it's somewhat even. You know, it doesn't look weird in any way, anywhere. It's a little uneven here. Might be okay. You just want it to not be overly stuffed on one side, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You don't want it to be lopsided. You can fix that a little bit with the iron, but not entirely. So yeah, I'm getting kind of the point where I need to stop pretty soon because this is almost going to be difficult to close. And he's a little lopsided. I think he'll be fine. Okay, so you can see, maybe I'll put a little more over here. Okay, this is pretty thick. One thing you want to do, I don't know if you can see it, probably not, maybe if I zoom in, there's like little dust particles that come off, little like plastic particles, whatever, from this polyfill, like it has dandruff. And that will get on the front of your stitching, especially if you're working on a table. So you will want to brush your pillow off, brush your table off before you do anything else. Because when you press this, you don't want to fuse those little particles onto your stitching and it could melt on. I mean, you wouldn't think it's very noticeable, but I think you would notice it. Okay. Looks like I need to shift this a bit. Okay, this is pretty good. Let's talk about how to seam this up. And I'm going to have to, as you can see, because I messed up my seam here, I'm going to have to start up earlier than normal to fix this, or go past it farther than normal to fix this because it's coming undone. So this is what I was talking about why you ideally would match your thread, so that if you can see a little bit, like here you can see too, the tiniest bit of that. It doesn't really matter. I don't care personally, but if you care, then using a red sewing thread in this case would be a little bit better. So I will, for the sewing up portion of this, we're going to do a ladder stitch to sew this up. So let me get my supplies. Okay, so we're gonna sew up the pillow using a ladder stitch, and I've just got some red sewing threads, not like a perfect match, but it's good enough. And I've got a regular hand sewing needle, scissors. Could use Halloween scissors. Okay, so what we're gonna do is take a length of sewing thread. This is Mettler, I don't know that you really need the color, but if you want it, it's 0629. You just need a Mettler or Gutterman or whomever sewing thread that coordinates. And I'm going to show you how to do a quilter's knot. You don't have to use that knot, I just find it helpful. Should probably get my reading glasses to do this. Okay, so you're gonna take your needle between your thumb and index finger of whatever your dominant hand is. You use your non-dominant hand to hold the tail. Bring the tail on top of the needle. Okay, so the tail's sticking out, and I'm going to put it in between my finger and thumb of my dominant hand. Okay, wrap it around 3 times. Pull the wraps down between your fingers as well. So I'm using my non-dominant hand to do the action. My dominant hand is holding the needle with the wraps. And then I'm going to use my non-dominant hand to pull the needle up. And my fingers are still holding the wraps and the thread. So here's the thread. Okay, and then I've got a quilter's knot at the end, and I'm going to want to trim the little tail off of that. Okay, so that's how you do a quilter's knot. Rewind and watch again if you need to. Rewind. How old am I, right? Okay, so to do a ladder stitch, you're going to be basically making a ladder. So actually, let me show you on a diagram first. So you're going to come up through the fabric edge. So let's say this is the fold in the fabric. So you're going to come up and go across. Here's the other edge. You're going to go like within the seam allowance and come up and go across. So you're basically doing this, and every yay many stitches you pull your thread tight and it closes everything up. So that's what we're doing. If you go on a diagonal, it won't look good. I learned that. So you need to go straight across like this. Diagonal will not help here. So first I need to get my thread into my pillow, and so I've got this knot, and the knot is going to keep it from coming out. So I need to go in. I think I'm going to come up here. So a little ways from where I want to start sewing. I'm going to try to come out in this seam there. Okay. Like that. Actually, I feel like I want to, well, it doesn't matter. All right, so here's the knot right there. And I'm just going to give a little tug. There, it popped through. You could hear it, right? All right, so now it's secure. And I need to go straight across into the other seam. Going through the seam allowance a little ways, maybe 1/8 of an inch. I'm pulling, and now I need to go straight across. If you can't tell straight across, just pull up on your sewing thread. Sorry, I'm trying to stay on camera here. And then that's where your needle should go. And I need to go over a little ways and come up. Okay, so now I can pull it tight and see where does it need to go. Needle needs to go here. Oops. It's hard to not do this in my lap, which I would normally do, not do standing up. Got it caught on the corner here. But see how easy this is because of the way we did that basting stitch and already ironed this in place. So we're not trying to figure out where should we be sewing because it's a really clear line defined for us. And then you can see as I tug this, it's starting to close up. Got a little bit of batting coming out there. We'll just, or fiber fill coming out. We'll just fix that. So it helps if you can kind of hold them closed too. It's a little harder to do right now for me, but I guess I'm managing it at this point. Mainly because, like I said, I'm not using my lap, so I'm just kind of standing here trying to hold it awkwardly. So you don't want to go too far, like, you know, the stitches shouldn't be too far apart. So try to keep it within 1/8 of an inch or so, definitely no more than 1/4 of an inch, you know, coming out of the fabric. So don't go under too much more than that. All right, normally I would stop where they meet up, but since I've got a loose seam, I'm just gonna sew almost to the end. Okay, so yeah, normally you wouldn't need to go that far. Because mine came undone, I had to keep going. So once you get to the end, or even if you run out and have to start over, you're gonna do that same knotting process. So I'm going to wrap 3 times around my needle and come in kind of close to where I've come out of my fabric. Okay, I'm holding it taut with my non-dominant hand, and I'm going to take my dominant hand and pull the needle through. And then give it a tug and it should pop in. Okay, now let's go make some magic at the ironing board. We're almost done. Okay, we're at the ironing board. We're gonna make some magic. What do I mean? You wanna get your iron turned up high. So I've got mine on the linen cotton setting. I've got water in my iron because I'm going to give it some steam. My pillow is steam. So you want to put your pillow face down on your padded ironing board. My iron is all warmed up and ready to go. And I'm going to push down hard and I'm going to give it shots of steam. You are going to be fine. Push hard. So you can see the steam go both ways. Okay. See how you can see it's changed color a bit. Keep going. I'll even sometimes use both hands. Okay, so this is going to be really hot. Be careful about touching it. It's still steaming, but look how good and flat this pillow looks. It's a thing of beauty. So I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. There will be a companion video coming soon that explains how to do the rickrack with the beading around the outside edge. That'll be a separate video, so that if you ever want to add that to any pillow finish that you're doing, you'll have the tools in your toolbox to do that. So you can be watching for that soon. Please consider signing up for my newsletter and subscribing to my channel. If you sign up for my newsletter, which is linked in the video description, then you get first access, early access to my tutorial videos. So newsletter subscribers get the private link, and then eventually it does go up for the public to view, but it goes first to my newsletter subscribers. So if you want earliest access to my tutorial videos, make sure you sign up for my newsletter. And subscribe to the channel. Again, that's another option. And I hope you'll like the video, share it with your friends if you think that that would be helpful to them. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching.